LBC 97.3. Call 0845 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC 973. This is London's biggest conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Well, back to the conversation about these extraordinary moves by David Cameron, as some people see them a direct response, talking tough over benefits, all as a result of UKIP perhaps stealing some of that political ground, and it's a UKIP story we're turning to now. Remember a few weeks ago, it was Godfrey Bloom, one of their MEPs, who was talking about the idea of bongo land as it comes to foreign aid. Well, it would appear another UKIP man is getting headlines for all the wrong reasons. He's one of the money men's, Treasurer Stuart Wheeler. He said females fail to get to the top because they're not as good at competitive sports such as chess and poker. He was speaking at an event last night, and we'll be hearing from one of the organisers in just a moment. He went on to say he doesn't approve of quotas for women in the boardroom. I'd just like to challenge the idea that it's necessary to have a lot of women on a particular number on a board. Business is very, very competitive. You should take the performance of women in another competitive area, which is sport, where men have no strength advantage. Chess, bridge, poker, women come absolutely nowhere. I think that has to be borne in mind. Well, I said we'd speak with someone who organised this event. Janice Atkinson is prospective UKIP MEP candidate for the South East. Joins me now. Let's deal with this chronologically, Janice Atkinson. What was the event set up to do?
Morning, Nick.
Hello.
Well, there's some EU legislation coming down the pipeline that is going to be imposed on the UK by October. The committee sits at the end of the month, and it's the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee that Godfrey Bloom sits on. Now, this committee has been set up, run mainly by women, none of whom have ever really worked in the private sector before, but they all think it's a jolly good idea that they impose 40% mandatory gender quotas on publicly UK-listed companies by 2020, and we think that's wrong. So we were highlighting it. So I set this debate up with the Institute of Economic Affairs, and we had people like Dr. Claire Gerardo, who's current chair of the Royal College of Practitioners. I had Joe Fairley, who's one of the joint co-founders of Green and Black's Chocolate, and Dr. Ruth Lee, one of our eminent economists, along with Len Shackleton, who's a fellow of the IEA and a lecturer at Buckingham University, who's written books on reams on equality and pay gap discrimination, and me, and all of the people in there were against gender quotas. We had an absolutely packed room. This is a silly season. It's August. Nothing really happens much in politics. And the Institute of Economic Affairs we were bursting at the door. We had to, there were people standing at the back, and we had to stream this.
Why are you against quotas, briefly? Why are you against quotas, Janice?
Because, you know, there's something called the law of unintended consequences. You often speak about the women that work in the bakers down the road, or the small bakers down in Orpington, which is down the road from me as well. Yeah. There's so many unintended consequences that come out of Brussels for the laws, for maternity rights, for argument's sake. Now, if you take some of the industries that are mainly male-dominated, that traditionally employ more men. If you look at North Sea diving, you look at heavy engineering, electronics, and the motor trade, they don't have 50% of women, because traditionally girls are not going into those areas. Now, you've only got to look at the AS results and the A-level results yesterday. Girls are not taking up the sciences, the hard areas like physics and maths, etc. So there's a problem. There's a pipeline problem of women coming through. That's changing. You know, my generation, I'm your generation. I'm round about your age. You know, we were still pushed down those sort of stereotypical gender lines for careers. Yeah. That's slowly changing. And you can't suddenly impose a quota. So in those traditional areas where they've employed men, and spread betting, where Stuart works, is one of them. My father was a bookmaker, traditionally male. So where do you get those 50% of women in the boardroom from? Where do they come from?
I hear you, and that's a valid point.
But
also,
now to
Mr. Wheeler, who suggested that we can't really have women in other boardrooms. I hear what you say about motorsport and other areas, but we can't really have women in any boardroom because they're not very good at bridge.
No, he didn't say that. What he was saying is that
business is very, very competitive. You should take the performance of women in another competitive area, which is sport, where men have no strength advantage. Chess, bridge, poker, women come absolutely nowhere. That has to be borne in mind.
Well, they don't. I don't know. I mean,
so we're writing off
Stuart.
the career ambitions, hopes, dreams, and aspirations of, broadly speaking, half this population because they're not very good at a hand of bridge.
No, he was making a tongue-in-cheek remark that this is the man that spends a lot of time at the Mayfair poker tables. You know, he made millions and millions out of spread betting, so he knows his business a bit. And I bet in Mayfair there aren't that many top women playing poker and bridge.
So you agree with him then?
No, I don't agree fully of what he said. It's been taken out of context, and this is my point. I've written in Huffington Post on this. What he did, he went on to clarify. My point is that there are some things that men are better at and women are better at, and that absolutely is. We have a gender difference, you know. We have a hormonal difference. We are different because we give birth. We are female.
I know, but you're not programmed to be better at bridge.
I don't know about bridge and poker and chess.
Yeah, but that's because it doesn't interest you. It's not because you're a woman. This is just demeaning, isn't it?
No.
To write off the hopes of women simply because they don't know how to advance on the chessboard is absurd.
Stuart clarified what he said. He said that men are better at some things than men, and women are better. You don't need to impose a quota on any profession. He's absolutely right about that. Do you know what he hasn't got? He hasn't got a sexist bone in his body.
How do you know?
He's got a wife and 4 daughters, all of whom I've met, and they would break his bones if he had.
Well, you don't know that. You don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
I know Stuart pretty well. And he's our treasurer. And he came over from the Tories when David Cameron sacked him because of his views on Europe, and he's been very welcome. He's been a very steadying hand. He's a very nice man.
But he's got this wrong, hasn't he?
No, but you have to take it into the wider context of how he said it, and he's absolutely right that the point he was making, that quotas should not be imposed upon us at an EU level.
Yeah, and women can't perform in the boardroom because they're not competitive. Are you competitive?
Oh, very competitive.
Right. Well, how's that then?
But do you know what?
Because you shouldn't be. That's why you don't get to the top.
No, he's not saying that
at
all.
He is.
And let me tell you something
Business
about
is very
UKIP.
competitive. Take the performance of women in another competitive area, like bridge, they come nowhere. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, but I don't know if they do, Nick. I have no idea whether... I've never played bridge. I never played poker. I've only ever played chess.
Janice, we've talked in the past. I've always enjoyed listening to you. What's attracted you to this misogynist party?
No, not misogynist. Let me tell you, Nick, that if we're going to ballot at the moment...
Bongo land, women not being able to
Sorry,
be in the board...
hear you.
I say bongo land, women not being able to be in the boardroom. Dear, dear, dear.
Yeah, but you know as well as I do that Godfrey Bloom was making a serious point about the $1 billion a month that we spend on international aid. Let me tell you about so-called misogyny in UKIP. It doesn't exist. I got to the top of the assessment centre to be a vigorous assessment to be, I think I'm the number 1 candidate behind Paul Nuttall, the deputy leader, and Nigel Farage.
Oh, yes, I've spoken with Mr Nuttall. Yes, indeed.
Okay, and if we get, it's now going to a ballot of members, and if we get the top women that have drawn top of the assessment, we will have 7 or 8 MEPs at the next election.
Well, you might be one of them. Are you ready to take a call from a disgruntled UKIP voter? Do you want to talk to them?
Go on.
Dan's in West Hampstead. Morning, Dan.
Morning, Mr. London. Morning, Janice.
Morning, Dan. Do I know you?
Morning. We don't know each other, but I have been to a couple of UKIP events, and I switched over from the Tories to UKIP. And quite frankly, I'm very, very upset and quite disgusted at these comments. Liv Boeree, European poker champion. Jessica Ennis, Olympic champion. The Williams sisters. These are all females. These are all competitive females. And for Stuart Wheeler, who's a smart guy, for him to come out with these Neanderthal comments, which sort of denigrate women, is absolutely disgusting. My mum brought me and my brother up single-handedly. And she's a top lawyer, one of the top employment lawyers in the country, and she's competitive. She takes on multinational companies in the law courts. How is she not competitive? You know, you can't come out. It's so damaging.
Dan,
I don't know if you realize how damaging it is.
It has been taken out of context. And if you'd have come to the debate the other night, and I wish you had, because we did put it out to a wider UKIP audience and membership, is that the whole point was we have to stop this legislation. And I'm really sorry that the whole debate is being signed like this, because this is actually coming down the line. Now, if you've been around in UKIP for as long as I have, I've been around for 2.5 years, you know there's no misogyny in the party. You know, we've all got there. We don't have a quota of women. We're not the Harriet Harmans of this world. We're not the Maria Millers from the Conservative Party. We're not running an A-list, and I was a so-called A-list Cameron cutie from the last election. Every time I stood in front of a selection committee from a Tory selection committee, I said, I'm not one of those women. I don't actually agree with quotas. I don't agree with the A-list, but I'm here. I've got to play the game. In UKIP, as you've probably found, then there is complete equality. There is no misogyny whatsoever, and I'm just really sad that this is sidelined. Let me tell you a little story that I told.
We're out of time for little stories. I need Dan's reaction. Dan, reaction to what you've heard from Janice.
Well, look, I agree with you that I think all sensible people agree that quotas are not the way forward. However, I've noticed that several of the UKIP events that I've been to, it's very much white, old men, and there are very few young people, very few women, very few people from different minorities. I'm not from the left at all. I'm very much from the right, and I'm very much from the common sense brigade. But I've got to say, we need to develop, and UKIP really needs to get its act together. And
my thanks, Janice Atkinson, prospective UKIP MEP candidate for the South East. Check her blog out on the Huffington Post. Thanks also to you, Dan, for your call. More views on that, and we will return on to David Cameron. Crack it down, getting tough with those benefits after this.